This week on the WriterCon podcast.
So you want to write, you sit down and do it. And then once you do it, once you call yourself a writer, once you are a writer, if your only motivation is to keep writing, then you keep writing. There's no getting tired. There's no burnout. There's no blank page. That's your job.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Lara Bernhardt, award-winning author of the Wantland Files book series.
Thank you, Jesse Ulrich. Hey there, writers. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to 2025. I hope you've settled into the new year. Today, as we are recording, it is bitter cold outside with snow flurries and so much wind. Bustafer's little catio practically flew across the yard. Did you notice that, Laura?
So bad.
21.
Feels like 8 degrees.
And
yes,
if
it does.
you hear Baxter the dog barking, it's because it would just be cruel to put him out in this. So I apologize. And if you hear a noise that sounds like a banshee, that's the wind.
Mm-hmm.
I thought we need to make predictions for 2025, guys, for the book world predictions. What do you got, Laura? What is one thing you think is going to happen in the book world or two, whatever? One thing you think is going to happen in the book world in 2025?
I predict for sure that I will continue to be irritated by the rise in AI, people trying to use AI to cut corners, which I just don't love at all. You know, I won't go into it. That's my big prediction. And then my hope for 2025 is that my next book is a huge hit. Because I'll have one out later this year.
I like that's a good prediction.
Yeah.
I predicted this year I'm going to be incredibly successful. No,
Why not?
Let's manifest that.
Let's manifest
Let's
that.
manifest
Like,
it.
the secret. It's positive thinking.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What about you, Jesse? You got predictions for us?
I do, and listeners of the show will know we've talked about how like Barnes & Noble has been trying to like not reinvent itself, but give each of its stores its the ability to sort of like customize itself to the region in which it lives. My prediction is there is going to be a sort of resurgence of either like quasi like regional or national book chains. Like another one's going to appear. I feel like people are wanting to go. I think people are going to want to go to a place. They want to go to a place that has curated. When TikTok gets shut down in March, I think there is going to be a desire for places people can go to see a curated list of books. And I feel like so either like local bookstores are going to have even more of a resurgence, or one of the maybe chains that's shut down, or one of the regional chains that sort of still exist is going to start expanding.
I hope you're right. Or maybe we should pool our pennies and we should just start one.
Maybe we should do it.
What's our bookstore going to be called? WriterCon, of course. No. Okay, I'll make a couple of predictions.
Let me think on that.
Everything but James Patterson.
Yeah. Patterson and Co.
No James Patterson. No Patterson. There we go.
No Patterson.
No Pats.
No Patterson. That's the name of it.
Yeah, no Patterson.
I also predict, though, that I will continue to be greatly amused by Ralph's songs that he makes with AI. That's
which come
like
from
the
AI.
Usage of AI that I'm amused by.
Yep. Yeah. Did you guys read the statistics about Spotify? And basically now they're selling more audiobooks than ebooks. That's the first time this is.
Hear that.
I mean, not just Spotify. That's across the board. We're selling
Spotify,
more
digital
audiobooks than ebooks, but people are attributing it to Spotify doubling down on audiobooks. As far as predictions, I'm going to predict that the price of books is going up because that's not hard, especially since, as you probably know, print books often have paper in them. And most of our paper comes from Canada. So if there's some paper.
There's
paper right here.
So if the predicted tariffs that somebody keeps talking about go into place, books are certain to go up because the cost of paper is going to go up.
Yep.
I'm also going to be even more bold and predict that romantasy has plateaued or is close to it. I don't know if you guys have looked at the sales figures, but Rebecca Yarros and others had a great 2025 and 24, and I bet they do all right this year. But I can see that things are shifting, and there's an opening for something else to become the next big thing.
I have a prediction.
Yeah.
So if you remember in 2024, we talked about the hockey romance, genre.
Right.
I think 2025 is going to be the year of pickleball romance novels. So I think it's time.
I thought you were going to say that the hockey was going to just grow and go. Maybe fill that.
Oh,
yeah,
no. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Has anyone written one? We should do that.
Yes.
We should.
No, our daughters are reading right now Icebreaker.
And it's a pickleball romance?
No, hockey.
Okay.
And they want me in on this. We're gonna read this together and discuss it. But maybe we need to branch out.
A quick Google search says some people have already done it, but they don't look great.
Okay, good.
Well, one pickleball second chance romance, a romance mystery thriller. That's clearly an AI written novel, if I've ever seen one.
So that's the new trend when people list their books on Amazon. They give it a long, windy description so that there are more keywords. My prediction is coming
true. I'm irritated by AI written books. It's happening.
Yeah.
Alrighty. All right. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing a longtime friend of the podcast and longtime friend of me, and that's Barry Friedman. He has been a prominent professional stand-up comic for decades. And in recent years, he started writing. He's got 6 books published to date, including his warm and witty series about his father. We talked to him last year when the first volume came out, and now there's a second one. Plus, he's a humor and a political columnist. He's got a newsletter, and he does let me say that again. Geology writing. Okay, don't turn it off or skip yet. It's going to be a lot more interesting than it sounds, I promise. We will talk to Barry about all that and more, but first, the news. News story number 1. Deluxe editions of books are hot. Here's one I never thought I'd be saying. I can remember not that many years ago when people were predicting that print would all but disappear. But it seems that like vinyl, Gen Z is bringing it back because it's old-fashioned and quaint. And not just wanting any crummy old paperback book or whatever. They are in large numbers buying fancy hardcover, sometimes slipcase, almost always with sprayed edges, and interior illustrations are decorated in papers. That's what we call the deluxe editions. So I mentioned Rebecca Yarros a minute ago. They did the second book in her series, The Iron Flame, this way. They printed 115,000 copies, and they sold out. And these are higher priced deluxe books. And not only sold out, they sold out quickly. The publisher complained, should have printed more. But that's what publishers always say. It's either I should have printed more or I should have printed fewer, one or the other. It's not limited to romantasy, though, although it did seem to me to focus primarily on books written by women for women. But for instance, Kristen Hanna, who I've known forever, and not writing romantasy, but very prominent, and she's got a beautiful deluxe edition of her new books. So it's going all through the publishing industry. You know what I mean by the patterned edges? When you can look at the side of a book and it's just as pretty as the cover, or metallic foil covers, which I should have. Do I have one here? I'm sorry, I shouldn't look away from the microphone. I remember when my first book came out in 91, and that was all the rage then, that embossed with foil covers. and I got one the first time out. I don't really think it sold books, but whatever, it looks cool. Some people are doing reversible dust jackets or more elaborate artwork, seeing more artwork on the end papers, what's inside the hardcover before you get to the pages. Sometimes people put maps there and whatnot. People are even doing like ribbon bookmarks, like you saw in really old time books, bookmarks that are attached to the spine so it can go inside, and other kinds of bonus content. And they seem to be sweeping the industry. So thanks again, Gen Z. You got me back to vinyl, and now I guess you're going to get me back to Deluxe books. Lara, is this going to be good for publishing?
I think it already is. It's a big hit. And of course, we've got those boxes that come periodically too. I think maybe that's what helped spur this on initially, perhaps, when you have the fairy loot box that comes to you regularly. It's got those beautiful sprayed edges in them. Who could resist? Who could resist? We have a lot of books in our house, but my goodness, you see something that beautiful, you can't help but want a copy of it.
Well, I think that's the theory, isn't it? In a way, they're trying to get people to buy the book a second time. You liked it, now you want the fans. Exactly what they do in the comic book world, right? With here's the new issue with 14 variant covers, right? So you can
do you know how many versions of the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy I have bought in my life? It's like 7. Because like technology gets better, and so there's a newer version, and then there's a special version that's got cool book holders, or like a cool Hobbiton statue or whatever. I'm like, fine, I'll buy it again.
Looks like, you got to have the latest and greatest, right?
That's right.
Now, when James Patterson gets his sprayed edges deluxe book,
God, how? Jeez, like there'd be so many books. It'd be such a small book. It's such a small book.
It depends on how many words you put on the page.
That's true. That's true.
All right. News story number 2. This one is also happy making. An Arkansas judge struck down the statewide book banning law. We talked about it on the podcast, I remember, Arkansas law that could literally have sent librarians and booksellers to prison for providing material that supposedly might be considered harmful to minors. Of course, who gets to decide that? Nobody's really... Well, anyway, it was a misdemeanor, but you could still get up to a year in prison plus a huge fine if you are found to have distributed a harmful item to a minor. But the federal judge struck it down, saying it was overbroad and violated the First Amendment. That will, of course, be appealed. But in the meantime, the thought police do not appear to have taken control in Arkansas. Here's a quote from Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders, governor of Arkansas, as everybody probably already knows, a Republican. And she said, quote, "Schools and libraries shouldn't put obscene material in front of our kids," end quote. But I don't think anybody ever accused anyone of putting obscenity in front of it. Nobody's going to put obscenity in the kindergarten. All the challenges, or most, were about race or LGBTQ issues, weren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they were.
So that really is kind of content-based censorship. I don't know. Jesse, what do you think? You happy, sad?
I'm happy. Like, again, it's one of those things where the words they're using to describe the problem they're trying to fix are not describing the things that are actually happening and are unnecessary in our current system. Like, one, again, have people never met kids? Like, you tell a kid they can't read something, that's all they're going to want to read. First of all, second of all, they're in search of a problem that doesn't exist. So
yes, exactly. Which makes it such a waste of resources.
Yeah,
we saw a news article on a case in Florida where there's one person every day filing day after day a book ban request over and over and over again, and it's taking up valuable resources, time. It's incredibly frustrating, and it's going after a problem that, as you said, doesn't even exist. He's determined that he's going to decide what children should read. I don't want that I wouldn't want that for my children. Parents interviewed in it didn't want that for their children.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Why would one person think they get to decide what everyone's children should read?
Yeah, get a hobby, do something.
Do something.
Like
that's
learn
exactly
to knit anything.
What I said, exactly what I said. That guy could be putting all of that time and effort into something truly beneficial, and instead he's wasting time and resources.
He must have been one of those people who would like back in the day would have like typed on a typewriter like a note to a TV show complaining about something that was on that episode, right?
Yes.
300 letters of
yeah.
So this is the point where I once again brag because one of my books was banned in Florida from the schools. This is one of my thrillers, Dark Eye. I want, FYI, Lara, I want that on my tombstone. Banned in Florida.
Yeah.
but the point is, there's nothing remotely racy in this book. And why would people have a thriller in a junior high school anyway? I mean, that doesn't belong in the library.
And again, you don't think teenagers this day are seeing much racier things on the internet than in a library? Let's be honest with ourselves here.
Yep, I agree. All right, let's turn to Craft Corner. Today in Craft Corner, we have John Meyers and Emily Brooks. They're the authors of Write Better Together, and they will be discussing the best approaches to narrating your author's experiences. And you know, you've probably heard that old adage about show, don't tell, which first time I heard it, I thought, you're going to write a whole book without telling anyone anything? That is not going to work. What does this actually mean? Well, they're here to explain it. Take it away, John and Emily.
Craft Corner.
Welcome, everybody, to WriterCon's Craft Corner. I'm John Meyers from Write Better Together. Hey, look, everybody, it's Emily Brooks.
Hello, John Meyers. We're going to be talking about narrating your character's experiences. You don't always have to say in your narration when your character sees, feels, or even thinks something. While it's okay to do that every once in a while, it creates a deeper point of view for your character if your narration simply shows us what they are experiencing in the narration. So I have this example from Frederick Bachman from a man called Uwe. I have altered his paragraph. I'm going to read the altered paragraph, and then I'm going to read his original paragraph. I'm added language to describe his seeing things and thinking things. Uwe spotted the cat sitting there with a nonchalant expression in the middle of the footpath that ran between the houses. He noticed it had half a tail and only one ear. Patches of fur were missing here and there, which made it seem to Uwe like someone had pulled it out in handfuls. He thought it wasn't a very impressive feline. Okay, so notice the words he spotted, he noticed, made it seem to Uwe, and he thought.
I noticed the noticing.
I'm going to read the original version now, and hopefully you'll notice the difference. The cat sat with a nonchalant expression in the middle of the footpath that ran between the houses. It had half a tail and only one ear. Patches of fur were missing here and there as if someone had pulled it out in handfuls. Not a very impressive feline.
It actually strengthens the descriptions, right? By doing it properly, the prose is more impactful because the descriptors are stronger.
That last line, I think, is especially important. It says, not a very impressive feline. That's not in italics. It doesn't say he thought that. It's just part of the narration. I think that brings you closer into the point of view of the character who's being narrated.
Thank you, William, Laura, and Jesse, for having us on WriterCon. We
couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you so much, John and Emily. Jesse, it's time to get zesty. Take us to Barry Friedman. Barry Friedman, welcome back to the podcast.
Do I have the record? I want to be the one who's been on the broadcast more than anybody.
I wouldn't be surprised. We need, I think I said this before, we need those jackets like they have on SNL that, if you've hosted 5 times, then you get a special jacket or something. But is there anybody who's been on more than Barry, you think?
I don't think so. I think he's probably the record holder.
Yeah, well, it's always interesting fun,
Is he a
and a little
five-timer yet?
profound.
I think I am a 5-timer. And
Probably, yes.
anybody get close to my record, just call me. I'll be on the show again. We'll just
Got it. Okay,
great.
deal. Okay.
trying to make cookies this
All
Christmas.
right. We're going to talk about a lot of things, but first, traditional first question. If you could offer writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
All right. Remember the director Jose Quintero?
No, and I know a lot of directors. Who's that?
Eugene O'Neill. He directed Eugene O'Neill and Jason Robards on Broadway.
Oh,
A million shows. He came to Tulsa. He does a conference. He does a symposium. And somebody asked him about acting. And he said, look, you want to act, you act. You find friends, you find a garage, and you act. So you want to write, you write. You sit down and you write. Bill, you've talked about this a million times, but it really is true. You just sit down and you do it. And if you're lucky enough to actually make a living at it and you can't be motivated to keep writing, you lose me. So you want to write, you sit down and do it. And then once you do it, once you call yourself a writer, once you are a writer, if your only motivation is to keep writing, then you keep writing. There's no getting tired. There's no burnout. There's no blank page. That's your job. You're right.
okay. So we got so many things we can talk about with you. We should have him on more than once, Laura. I'm just thinking. But first, you still work decades as a stand-up comic.
Yeah.
And you've also written, what, we're up to about 6 books now. So, but first, let's start at the beginning. How did this idea, this dream of being a stand-up comic, where did that come from?
I was driving on I-44 with my first wife, and there was a message board in one of the hotels that said comedy contest, first prize, $100. And she said, you seem kind of bored. Why don't you try it?
Really?
And I tried it and I won. Not a big deal, but I won. Next week, same billboard, same hotel, another contest, another $100. Entered that one, won again.
Nice.
By the third week,
They let you just keep coming?
well, after they stopped doing that after a while, so I went to the comedy club and started working on an act because they had open mic nights, amateur nights, no talent night, whatever you wanted to call it. And I went and started coming every week, writing material, trying to do it. And about maybe 3-4 months later, a comedian who I met that week said, do you want to open for me in Sioux Falls, South Dakota? So I had my first gig in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Did a bunch of one-nighters in Kansas and Missouri and Iowa for a year or 2 or 3. Then I auditioned for a club in Las Vegas. And I got into the club at Catch a Rising Star at Bally's. And then I started working at Bally's every 4 or 5 weeks. And then that led to another gig, And by the 90s, I was on this level anyway, probably appearing in Vegas more than anybody else because there's 3 or 4 hotels that I was working in. So,
Yeah, I think you were at the Excelsior when I saw you. No, not the Excalibur. That's what it was.
Excalibur, yeah. Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
That was one of the hotels, and Bally's was, and the MGM, and the Riviera, and the old Maxim Hotel, and Dunes, and a little bit of the Tropicana. So that's how it all started. And then from that, we got into, you didn't ask, but that's where the writing came from. The more you write, that's where the first book came from, just writing about the previous 20 years or the first 20 years being a comedian.
Yeah, well, I mean, you already were a writer because you're writing this material, right? You're not writing books, but anyway, go ahead, Laura.
I'm jealous that you got to see him when he was in Vegas. I think that sounds like a blast.
I think I even appear in one of Bill's early books, don't I?
Oh, yeah. At least one. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Probably one of the, it's in one of the Susan Pulaski books because they're set in Vegas.
Oh,
and so she goes to see a show and it's you.
That's right.
Love it.
Or she couldn't go because somebody was shot and killed.
Well, that's worse. But
she was headed in the shooting.
One way or another, you're in the book.
I was in the book, yeah.
Oh, okay. So as a result, of course, everybody expects everything you write to be funny. And some of it is, and some of it isn't. Explain that to us.
Well, what's that great line about the difference between that comedy is or drama is comedy plus time. I think I heard that somewhere from somebody. And that's,
I would have thought comedy is tragedy plus time.
I knew
that makes sense.
I knew I'd miss it up. Yeah, that's it. Comedy, there's time and there's distance and something to do with each other.
Right.
So what happened was, after the Road comic came out and the one after that followed that, I think the third or fourth book was about my son, who died, as you know, of drugs. And I thought, well, if I had any real skill, I would build him something or plan something or do something like that. But I didn't. And I thought, let me see if I can write a story about his life, specifically the last 5 days, right after he died. And I wanted to see if I could actually write that. And there's some funny things in that, but obviously it's the aftermath of his death. And I wanted to see if I could actually tell a story about what it's like to experience the aftermath of somebody's death who shouldn't die. 24-year-olds are not supposed to die. And you were nice enough to publish it. So at that point, I realized, well, I can actually do this. I mean, I can do this because you can do it because you're looking at it. That's one of the things about being a writer. You know, the difference between writers who are published and writers who aren't published is that somebody gets published and then your whole perception changes of yourself. You're now a writer and you can look on the shelf, there I am. And that changes how you write. That changes how you think about yourself as a writer. And that changes the perception of people when they know, oh, you're a writer. You write comedy, and you write about your son, you write politics, you write geology, whatever it is. And then the ball starts rolling, terrible cliche there, but it does happen that you then start becoming this thing called the writer.
Yeah.
You want to turn that on low because it's very pretentious, but there is something to that. And you both know this, that, you know, when you write and you sit down and you do it, you realize there's a thing to doing it. It's not just impulse, and it's not just the light from above that hits you. There is an actual thing to doing it, and you have to honor that thing about doing it, whatever you're writing. And wanting to be a writer is kind of easy. Calling yourself a writer is kind of easy, but actually doing it. So the more you do it, the more I did it, the more I felt like I could actually call myself a writer. Interesting about that was I knew a guy who was a toll taker back when they had toll takers on the
right. I think I know the guy you're talking about. Go ahead.
And I remember thinking, I can't wake up tomorrow morning and call myself a toll taker because you got to get trained, you got to get hired, you got to get placed. Right. But he could wake up and call himself a writer the next day. I thought that was tremendously unfair. That you were just allowed to do that, right?
I suppose you could call yourself a toll taker, but
that at some point I thought you need to treat it seriously, and you need to, however that seriousness becomes your life. That's the thing. You didn't ask any of this, sorry, but that's how. That's really how it happens. You know Bill Martin, right? That great story about when he came and we were at the same conference, and he told the writers that you get up every morning and you go to your workspace, but before you go to workspace, you have breakfast, you get dressed, you put on shoes, and you go to work. And I remember thinking, shoes? Nobody wears shoes. That's the whole point of being a writer. You don't have to wear shoes. But he said,
really even have to dress.
That helps you take this seriously. You're going somewhere to do this thing that you want to do, that you love doing, that you think is important. So if you don't know how to get started as a writer, I would just tell you to put shoes on.
Yeah.
The most important.
And then maybe write something. Yeah. I don't, for that matter, I never put on shoes, but I know people who are very successful, but they still like take the train downtown and go to their office and work. And I think I do that in my recliner every day, but it works better for them if they, like you're saying, treat it like a job.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking of jobs, you have just released this book hovering over my head. It's the second book in your ongoing series of hilarious and warm and witty tributes to your father. Featuring a word in the title that we can't say without getting banned by the podcast police. But anyway, you can probably figure it out. It's Jack Blank 2, which is appropriate, is an appropriate title for this book, right?
Right, because the whole Jack series is about the last 20 years of my father's life. And as you know, and you coined the phrase, it will be the only 4-part trilogy in the history of publishing. That the first section, the first segment was his years in Las Vegas. The second segment, over your shoulder, is the years in Tulsa before he went to the Tulsa Jewish Community Retirement Center, which he calls the Hebrew home. That would be part 3. That's coming out this year. And then part 4 will be the last year of his life. Because I could not figure out a way to join that with part 3. So chapter 4 is just going to be the actual last year of his life. And the thing about the book, the serious part of the book is, even from the beginning, you know this man is going to die. There's no... And the problem or the obstacle was, is that important? And I found it really wasn't as important as those last 20 years of his life. And it hit me that the last 20 years of his life wasn't about waiting to die. It literally was about going to buffets and gambling and going to the bagel place. That really what mattered were the moments. And those moments involved him usually winning the conversation, usually having an insight which now seems a lot more profound than it was then. Just a quick example about that. He was an accountant and did accounting long after he should have stopped. And at one point, he was 93 at the time. He was doing an 85-year-old Yugoslavian doctor's tax return who was also a landlord in New York. These tax returns can be like 20 pages long. My father had 7 items filled out on this, 7 lines of 20 pages. I said to my father, the IRS is going to audit Peter. You cannot send in this tax return. And my father said, so? They don't like it? They'll send him a letter. I said, that's your quality control. All right. So what's funny about that was I do that bit on stage. And somebody comes up to me, an actual CPA, and says, I got to tell you something. Because I enjoyed that joke as much as anybody. But that's exactly what the IRS is going to do. They're not going to send somebody out. They're not going to arrest them. They're going to send them a letter. And I thought, that's brilliant. And it hit me that my father, in all these comments and all these stories and all these absurdities and these weird connections he was making, was never entirely wrong. And while it was going on, it played for laughs. It was funny. It was my father's world. The rest we were just visiting. But that's what hit me ever since he died, that how close he was to the truth and the insights all along. And I thought I had captured most of those moments and understood most of those moments, but even I missed it. And the whole book, the whole series is about not missing moments because he's not going to be here soon. I didn't know what soon meant, but even then I missed it. And that's what hit me. And that's when I did that TED Talk, was that the idea was to capture the person and not my grief about the person dying. Tried to do that with the book about Paul as well. The important thing was him, not me.
Well, that's what I love about these books. It's a topical issue. It's weighty subject matter, and yet they're delightful to read and very informative. I mean, that we're all just getting older.
Right.
We're all going to face this.
Yeah.
And look how he continued to live to the very end. He was enjoying himself and making the most out of every day. That's what I took out of the books, and I love it. And you tell it so well.
That's really what. And the last thing he said to me, the last words he said to me, he was in the hospital. He was aspirating, so he couldn't have any water. He was, but if he had any water, he drowned to death. This way, he was just going to suffocate to death. It's a terrible way to die, but it was only 2 days worth. And I said, look, Dad, I cannot get you any water. I couldn't explain it to him, but I cannot get you any water. He goes, what good are you? Get the hell out of here. I said, you're throwing me out of the hospital. He said, yeah, get out. I said, let me get the nurse. Maybe she'll be able to get something for you. Cold wash rag. Maybe you can bite into it or something. And he said, she's not going to do anything. She's a Republican. He went out with a joke. It's brilliant.
Runs in the family.
So do I understand that there's actually going to be 4 books?
4 books, yes.
4 books. So we're going to have the 4-book trilogy. So just like one of my favorite authors, Douglas Adams, his Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's a 4-book trilogy. You're following in excellent footsteps.
Yeah.
Or 5, maybe. I seem to remember Adams saying that this is the 5th volume in the increasingly inaccurately named trilogy, or something like that.
I'm not sure that one was. Not sure it was finished before his sudden demise.
This one floors it. And again, Bill, thank you for letting me do the 4th one, because the 3rd one could not fit everything I wanted to put in that. So thank you.
Well, it's better. Break it up than have some huge long thing that's... that's part of growing up with the moment when we realize that our parents aren't quite as clueless as we thought they were when we were younger. My dad, who passed a couple of years ago, may be the only person on earth who actually benefited from an IRS audit. I mean, I don't know why they came out, but they spent like a month at our house messing around with the receipts, and finally, not only did not find anything wrong, but found a couple of deductions he'd missed. He benefited about $15,000 as a result of being audited.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing I think that you probably got from your father and mother, obviously, but your father, is that at some point, like in my father's case, that him being my father wasn't as important as him being Jack Friedman. That these people actually had lives before they had any connection to you, before you were tethered to them. He was Jack Friedman. And in his mind, there's a good part of him that was always Jack Friedman, not Barry's dad or Florence's husband. And that was something that it took me a while to realize that's who I'm dealing with here. Because at some point the parent-child thing gets discombobulated. And you realize I'm talking to a grown man who's 93, who knows more than I think he does, but can also understand that things are not working as well as they used to.
Yeah. Yeah. In addition to this book, you've also got a newsletter distributed through Substack, which is doing really well. It's a sort of a blend of humor and politics and sometimes other things. Tell us about that.
Again, it started out as a political blog, and then it morphed into some comedy and some weekly features like a Friday list where I just have the 10 craziest things that happened that week. And also lately, I have been featuring an author every day with a quote from his or her work. And I'm up to about 97 authors now. It started a couple of years ago. And like last week, I did Maimonides. Next week, I'm going to do, I think, Tennessee Williams. And then there's Nathan Gordimer. And then there's, obviously, Joseph Heller. I've done with Philip Roth, Norman Mailer. And I try to find authors either that I have read, more likely should have read, I should know their work. And I actually just feature their work from 5 or 6 of their books every week. That starts off the week every morning. Right. Then on Mondays, I do a story of something that happened in the news in depth. Wednesday, I do a sort of a fake headline list called Heads or Tails, Tales. Thursday, I do something with Thursday, I do something with Charlie Pierce at Esquire. I submit something and he publishes it. And Friday, I do my Friday list. And every other week, I do a political column that I wrote for publication called Progressive Populist. So It seems to be working pretty well. But again, as we talked earlier, that's pretty much it. There are weeks I don't have a lot to say. And I realize, wait a minute, people are paying money now to hear you, to read you. So you can't be motivated to sit down and write them something?
Again, it's a job.
This is what you wanted to do, and you can do it, and you can't sit down to do it? You can never complain about anything again. And it takes me about 10 minutes to get down there. And interestingly, I haven't really tracked this. Every time I decide to post something when I don't really feel like posting something, I will invariably pick up a subscriber or two. And I'll think, you see, that's why you picked the subscriber up, because he or she read something that they liked. And so, yeah.
Yeah. So, big success, though. Go ahead.
After living for decades in Tulsa, I hear you're contemplating a move overseas.
Oh, the
Do you want to
contemplation's
talk
over.
about that? Is that fair to share with the world?
Yeah, I'm going. Next month, I am moving to Coimbra,
wow.
Portugal.
Okay.
University town there. And the adventure of it hit me and Melissa, my wife, back in March. It had nothing to do with politics, or very little to do with politics. And we started the process, and they have a really attractive retirement visa, which I could get. And it was all approved back in December last month. And February 15th, I go, and we'll see how it works. Good thing you can still stay connected with people, but I'm going to try and do it over there. Politics, since the election has something to do with it, but mostly it's just this window in my life. I guess we all have these windows where you think, I've got to do this now, because I wasn't going to do it when my father was alive. I wasn't going to leave Tulsa while he was here.
Right.
I couldn't see having the strength or inclination to do it when I was 75 or 80. This just seems to be the moment to do it. So we're going to try it. And it may be a really stupid decision, but at least we won't regret it.
You won't spend the rest of your life saying, darn, we should have gone to Portugal,
Yeah, but I don't think I'm going to spend the rest of my life thinking, damn, I should have stayed in Tulsa.
Well, you can always come back, right?
Yeah, I can always come back. That's exactly right. I can always come back.
But there is one very important thing we've not discussed yet, and that, of course, would be your geology writing.
Yeah, I've been writing.
Everybody listening right now is saying, "What?
Yeah.
What's geology writing?" Go ahead.
A dear friend of mine, 35 years ago, was the editor of the American Association of Petroleum Geologists Explorer magazine, and he thought I could write, and he started giving me some features to write. And these associations pretty much exist to give old white guys awards. That's really why they have any reason to live. And they all get awarded something, and then there's features written about them. Well, I can do those. Mm-hmm. And I do other stories that don't involve too much scientific jargon. And really, thank God for cut and paste, because I'm not sure how I would last otherwise. And you put this story together, and you understand what's allowable, what's not. And it's formulaic writing, but what I like about it is, do you ever find, either one of you, when you write about something you don't really care about viscerally, you find yourself writing some of your best work? Does it ever hit you, just the objectivity of it, that you're here and it's there? Somehow your writing becomes more focused, certainly less self-conscious, and just you tackle the issues surprisingly even to yourself. I mean, I've written some articles then that I haven't thought anything of. I mean, the editor will call and say, I had to change your lead. I go, I don't care. I mean, I really don't care. I mean, I don't care, but I don't care, because you do a good job, you do a conscientious job. But, if they don't like the lead about these rocks, change the lead. But when people I've written about, will write me and say, nobody's ever written that about me, or no one ever dealt with that topic. Really? So it is kind of a nice exercise for me to sit down and write about something I don't really, really care about. And I guess the other reason, let's be frank about this, is that it pays a lot of the bills.
That's always helpful too.
Yeah, you do this writing so you can do the writing you want. But do I know anything about geology? I know that when you have dirt, you put water on it, it becomes mud. That's pretty much what I know about geology.
Some of this is oil and gas related, I'm guessing?
It's all oil and gas related, right?
Yeah.
So I get to write about, carbon capture, and I get to write about geologic plays, and I get to write about the Gulf of Mexico, and try and stay away from politics, which is impossible when it comes to, oil and gas exploration. But it's one of these gigs that I've been doing for a long time. And every month he calls and says, do you have any room on your plate for these articles? And I have plenty of room on my plate to make money as a writer. So I write them, and I always write the geologist an email. I could talk to them, but I would be lost if they talk back to me. So if I send them a list of questions, they answer me in the email, and then I have two screens open and I can actually move their words back and forth. So, yeah, it's one of those gigs that I fell into, and I am amazed as anybody it's still going on.
See, this reminds me of the writing I used to do when I was practicing law, and you're having to write briefs and all that kind of stuff every day. And not only do I not think that was my best work, I kind of tremble at the thought that someday I become so famous that some researcher digs all that garbage up. Just let it lie, guys.
Well, the one time I actually tried to insert something in one of these articles, they were doing a story about offshore drilling, California offshore drilling. And I remember reading that Joan Didion once had a quote that the quote was that one gets the feeling when one moves to California that things had better work out there because there we run out of continent. Which I thought was a great lead for offshore drilling. We run out of continent. So I write that in. I actually weaved it in. I thought it was a great lead to the story. And when the story came out, they dropped the whole Joan Didion reference, even though her father was a geologist, apparently. And I said, why would you drop that? It was actually made sense. Gave some color to this otherwise dry story. And the editor said, because the higher-ups had no idea who she was. So there you go.
There you go. Lara, I've been totally hogging this interview. What's the one question you've always wanted to ask Barry?
What does your writing process look like? You talked about treating it like a job, and we absolutely are on the same page that's how the writing gets done. And I think when I hear from people that are stalled out, they don't. They expect they like the idea of being a writer, but not actually sitting down and writing. So what is your process like from day to day? Obviously, it's probably different when you're writing a geology article or working on one of your books, but how do you keep yourself moving forward on that?
Just a quick story. My daughter asked me one time, she said, when you write, do you ever just write just to write, therapeutically or just to get through a moment? And I said, no. And she said, you'd be surprised how many people write for just that very reason. She said, everything you write has somewhere to go. And that changes how you look at your writing. You actually say to yourself, I have to get this to them. I have a deadline. And so that is essentially what motivates me. And the other is just simply, if you look at your output. Now, Bill, you have how many hundreds of books? You have 60 books out, right?
I think we're at 65 published.
Right? And Lara, you have 10?
7.
7.
Well, my 8th manuscript is with my agent right now being shopped.
Okay, now both of you, if you decided you were going to write just when you were motivated, just when you felt like the light from above came to you, I would say to you, you could do that. Look at your output. However you've been doing this works for you. I used to joke that if Bob Dylan wrote Mr. Tambourine Man on Monday, he could take the rest of the week off. You're done. Done to work for the week. So I think people, if they don't know whether they should sit down 9 to 5 and write or wait for that kind of strange impulse, that strange encouragement, to look at your output and see what you're writing. And if you're writing and publishing or doing the work and you're waiting for that impulse, then keep doing that. But if your output is not there, if your output's not there, then sit down and make a schedule and treat it like a job. So in my case, mostly I write because I have things that need to be done, even though a lot of it's my own deadlines.
Right.
I don't really write a certain amount every day unless I have to. And invariably when I will write something, it'll take much longer than I want it to write, but at least I know where it's going. So I have a column coming out tomorrow, which shouldn't have taken me 6 hours, but it has because I can, and it's not due till tomorrow, and it's mine, and I want it to be what it is. So I don't know if that answers your question, but really depends on what you want to do. If you're writing your first novel and it's not working, or you're not having any time to write because you're waiting to sit down for when you feel like writing, then get up at 5 o'clock in the morning before you go to work and write.
I like that.
If it's not important to you, then it's not. I mean, nobody's waiting for your book. But if you really want to get that book done, find the time to do it. If you can't find the time to do it, then you make the time to do it. Luckily,
I like that. I've had people tell me that they can't follow this schedule or that schedule. My advice is find the schedule that does work for you and then stick to it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about how much time people spend watching TV and being on Facebook or doing whatever, there's probably an hour or two during the day where they're doing other things besides writing, and by all means do it. But if you want to write a novel, you're probably going to need that time. It's like reading, it's like, how do you read a book anymore where there's so many distractions? And I've decided there's a formula. So you read 2 chapters, then you go check your email. And you get to read a chapter, and then you can check Facebook. But you cannot spend all your time on social media or talking about writing and not actually sitting down and doing it.
Yeah. All right, Barry, one last question. What can we look forward to seeing from you from the other side of the Atlantic Ocean in the future?
Well, I'm actually thinking, it's a great question. I'm actually thinking that it would be too cliche to write my first year in Portugal.
No, I would think a lot of people have done more with less, and I bet you would be a sensational travel writer.
Yeah, so I think
Mark Twain was a humorist. His biggest hits, though, were his travel books, bestsellers.
Yeah, so I think I'm going to think about that. I guess the political angle with that would be I actually got out. I mean, there are people who do want to leave the country. And a lot of it is just that first impulse. I hate it here. I'm leaving. But there's a whole process you got to go through. Even though my process went pretty smoothly, it's a deal. It's a thing. So I think that would be my first thought about Portugal. Is just, I'm here. My life is there. I know nobody in Portugal. Nobody. Which means there's going to be nobody who knows me, which means there's no restaurant, there's no table, there's no special sandwich, nothing. And I think that could be an interesting story about how you actually make it in a foreign land, although that's somewhat of a cliche, but I think that's what I'm hoping for after I ever get rid of the Jack series.
Sounds good to me. Hey, if you're leaving, can I have your table at the bagel shop? Because
we'll get it remade for you. Yeah, you're gonna put a sticker on it. Yeah, reserved for Barry's people or Barry. Yeah.
Barry and Company. Yeah,
Company. Yeah.
Barry, thanks for being on the podcast again.
Thank
we
you.
Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it as always. Good seeing you both.
Bye now.
Bye.
Just a couple of parting words. I'm going to remind you again that we've got the WriterCon cruise coming up in just a few months at the end of May, I think, isn't it, Lara? April or May? End of May. Yeah. And you can read all about it at the website. That's writercon.com/cruise. But it's an Alaskan cruise leaving out of Seattle, and I think this is going to be a blast. Plus, when the boat's not in a port somewhere where you're going to do stuff, we're going to be holding the writing classes. We'll have more than 20 hours of writing instruction. That's big group, that's medium sized, that's very small critique groups. Whatever you are looking for, that's what we're going to provide, because we keep the group small so we can very much tailor the presentation to the people who are there, right? Go to the website. If you have any questions, email me. It is, more complicated than I wish. You got to pay for the course, and then you've got to call the cruise line and book your room. But that's the only way we could do it. Use the code that we provide on the website. Tell them it's you're part of WriterCon, but the reason, there are so many room choices that's, if we did it, we'd have to give everybody the same room, and everybody doesn't want the same room. Some people want single, double, some people want a balcony, some people don't care. So go to the website. If you have any questions, email me, willbern@gmail.com. Would love to hear from you, and I would especially love to have you on this cruise, because we're not only going to talk shop a lot, we're going to have a great time. Let me also remind you that WriterCon has its own newsletter and magazine, and man, you don't want to miss out on that, because they are both fabulous, and the newsletter is completely free. So go to Substack, search for WriterCon, and join today. All right, until next time, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.